After my mom passed away, Dad remarried a woman named Cassandra. Years later, I stumbled upon a letter from Mom that exposed Cassandra's dark secret. On Mother's Day, I handed Cassandra the letter and watched her expression crumble. The black dress I wore to my mother's funeral still had the tags on. That detail, more than any other, seemed to encapsulate the entire, surreal nightmare. 13 months later, the tags were gone from my clothes, but the hollowed-out feeling remained, a permanent resident in my chest. When my father, Thomas, brought Cassandra home, he sat me down in the living room, a room that still smelled, to me, of my mother's lavender sachets. "Emily," he said, his voice a careful blend of gentleness and newfound resolve. "This is Cassandra. She makes me happy again. I need you to try." So I tried. I tried when I helped carry boxes of her designer shoes into the walk-in closet where my mother's worn gardening clogs and sun-faded sweaters used to live. I tried when I nodded politely as she replaced our family photos, candid shots of beach trips and birthday cakes, with stark, expensive abstract art that, she said, opened up the space. I tried hardest of all when she looked out at my mother's sprawling, chaotic vegetable garden, a place of earthy, tomato-scented joy, and declared, "We'll turn this into a meditation patio. Growing our own food is so provincial." For 3 years, I performed the role of the gracious, if quiet, stepdaughter. I was the perfect prop for their new life, attending her corporate galas in dresses she bought me, tolerating her friends who patted my head and cooed about how mature I was for 14. I became a master of the false smile, hiding my ocean of grief behind a seawall of perfect grades and impeccable manners. My father, dazzled by Cassandra's world of client relations, wine clubs and couples retreats, didn't notice that my laughter had been replaced by a silent, studious intensity. He didn't know I slept with my mother's favorite cashmere sweater under my pillow, a scent that faded a little more each day until only the ghost of her remained. Cassandra tried, in her own transactional way. She bought me lavish birthday gifts, a diamond tennis bracelet, a leather-bound journal, things she would want. She hosted elaborate dinner parties, introducing me as our daughter to important people whose names I forgot as soon as they heard mine. She started a college fund for me, ensuring every acquaintance knew of her generosity. But when I got my period for the first time, trembling and terrified, it was a cold, algorithmic Google search that taught me what to do. When I woke screaming from nightmares of my mother's final days, it was the warm, solid weight of our old golden retriever, Baxter, that comforted me, not a parental hand on my forehead. The breaking point was both subtle and seismic. I was cast as the lead in my high school's production of Our Town, the first thing that had ignited a genuine spark in me since my mother died. Opening night, a culmination of months of work and fragile hope, fell on the same evening as Cassandra's Can't Do Without Charity Gala. "Obviously, you'll need to skip the performance," she said, not looking up from her phone where she was scrutinizing seating charts. "The Richardsons are bringing their son. He's at Princeton. Connections, Emily." My father started to form an objection, a faint, "Now, Cass, it's her play," but she placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, and the protest died in his throat. "It's just a high school play, sweetheart," he said, his voice soft with apology and weakness. "There will be others." There wouldn't be. Not for me. Not like this. I went to my room, the dismissal a cold stone in my gut, and pulled out the antique rosewood jewelry box my mother had left me. Inside, beneath a tangle of costume jewelry, was her simple platinum wedding band, a lock of my white blonde baby hair tied with a faded silk ribbon, and a journal, its leather cover soft with use. I had never dared to open it, too afraid of the fresh grief its pages would unleash. That night I did. Most of it was a love letter to me, her hopes for my future, cherished memories of my first steps and words, advice she knew she wouldn't be there to give. It was heartbreaking and beautiful, but the final entry, dated 2 weeks before she died, was different. The handwriting, usually fluid and confident, was tremulous, the ink blotted in places. "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and I need you to know the truth. There is a safe deposit box at First National. The key is taped inside this cover. What you find there, it will change everything. I am so sorry." The key was small and silver, cool against my palm. Part 2, the vault. The next day, I told the school I was sick. The manager at First National, Mr. Henderson, was a man who had known my mother's family for decades. His eyes, kind and weary, softened with recognition when I gave him my name. "Your mother said you'd come eventually," he said, his voice low and grave. He led me past the buzzing teller lines to the hushed, cool vault. The box was heavier than it looked. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a USB drive, several thick folders of documents, and a letter addressed to me in my mother's unmistakable hand. "My dearest Emily," it began. "By now, Cassandra has probably woven herself so completely into the fabric of your lives that you can barely remember the pattern that came before. I have known about her for years. I read the letter twice, my hands trembling so violently the paper rattled. 6 months before her diagnosis, my mother had grown suspicious of my father's late nights and sudden business trips. She'd hired a private investigator. The report was meticulous, brutal in its detail. Hotel receipts from cities where he had no business, grainy photographs of them together, entering lobbies with their heads bent close. And the text messages, screenshots that made my stomach clench. "She's taking Emily to her mother's this weekend. Come over. Can you imagine when we don't have to hide anymore?" And one from my father, sent just 4 months before my mother first complained of a headache. Sometimes I wish she would just disappear. But the affair was only the prelude. The folders contained financial records showing that my father and Cassandra had been systematically plundering my mother's family trust, the legacy of 3 generations that was meant to be my inheritance. They had created a labyrinth of shell companies and fake client accounts, moving millions through offshore havens. My father's signature was on every critical document. Cassandra's was on most. Then came the final, chilling layer: medical records, notes from doctors puzzled by her rapid decline. A private toxicology report she had commissioned when her suspicions turned inward. "I started feeling wrong after our anniversary dinner," she wrote. "Just tired at first, then increasingly ill. The doctors couldn't explain it. When I began keeping track, I noticed I only felt this way after meals that Thomas prepared specially for me. There were lab reports analyzing food samples from our home, tests on her hair showing elevated levels of heavy metals consistent with low-grade chronic poisoning. It was circumstantial, but the pattern was horrifying. I can't prove anything," my mother's letter concluded. "And by the time you read this, it won't matter for me. But I couldn't leave you unprotected." She had outmaneuvered them. In her final weeks, working with lawyers my father knew nothing about, she had restructured everything. The company I thought he controlled, the house we lived in, they were technically mine, held in a secret, ironclad trust that would activate on my 18th birthday. Enclosed was an envelope with 3 business cards, a forensic accountant, a sharp-eyed lawyer specializing in financial crimes, and a retired judge, a man who had been my grandfather's closest friend. I sat in the bank's silent, windowless room for hours, the air thick with the dust of betrayed secrets. When I finally walked out, the confused, grieving girl I had been was gone. In her place was someone harder, clearer, and fiercely focused. Part 3, The Apprentice. I didn't scream. I didn't confront. I did something far more terrifying. I became the daughter they always wanted me to be. For the next 2 years, my performance was Oscar-worthy. I aced every exam, chaired the clubs Cassandra suggested, and made charming small talk at every mind-numbing corporate function. I was their rising star, their perfect progeny. And all the while, I documented everything. My bedroom became my command center. I installed a hidden safe behind a false panel in my bookshelf. I recorded their dinner table conversations about difficult clients and complex investment strategies on my phone. I photographed documents my father left carelessly on his desk, trusting his 16-year-old daughter wouldn't understand their significance. I built my own spreadsheets, cross-referencing their lies with the evidence my mother had left me. 6 months after finding the letter, I contacted her trustees. We met in Judge Henderson's oak-paneled study on a Saturday. I was supposedly at a debate team practice. "Your mother was one of the finest people I've ever known," the judge said, his voice like grinding stones as he reviewed the documents. "What do you want to do, Emily?" I had rehearsed this moment. "I want to learn everything. About the business, about finance and law. I want to be ready to take back what's mine." He nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. Your mother said you'd say that. And so my double life began. By day, the accomplished daughter. 3 evenings a week, the clandestine apprentice. The forensic accountant taught me to follow the money through the tangled web of lies. The lawyer schooled me in corporate law and the art of the contract. The judge opened doors to his network, bankers, regulators, old family friends who were disgusted by what had become of my mother's company. I graduated high school at 16. My father and Cassandra were ecstatic. Yale early admission. My father beamed at the small, sterile graduation party they threw. All their friends, none of mine. The board is already excited about your future with the firm. I smiled, knowing that in less than 2 years, I would be the board. That summer, Cassandra made her move. Over lunch at an obscenely expensive restaurant, she reached across the table and touched my cheek. You're my daughter in every way that matters, she said, her eyes glistening with calculated sincerity. Let's make the adoption official before you go to Yale. I saw the tension around her eyes, the quick, assessing glance she shot my father. This wasn't about love. It was a corporate takeover, a move to solidify her claim to the family assets. I smiled, my heart a block of ice. Nothing would make me happier. Part 4, the gift. Mother's Day dawned, bright and flawless. Cassandra had planned her annual garden party, a showcase of curated perfection. The adoption announcement was to be her crowning moment. That morning, I found her in her dressing room, surrounded by a sea of cream-colored silk and linen. I have something for you, I said, handing her an elegantly wrapped box. I'd like you to open it now. It's personal. Pleased and slightly puzzled, she complied. Inside was a custom-bound book, its cover embossed in gold, a daughter's gratitude. Oh, Emily, she breathed, expecting a saccharine collection of memories. Then she turned the first page. A photograph of my mother, vibrant and alive, stared back at her. Confusion. Then, the slow, dawning horror as she turned the pages. Hotel receipts, bank statements, text message screenshots. My annotations, in neat, precise handwriting, connected the dots. I watched the blood drain from her face, watched a fine sheen of sweat break out on her forehead. Her perfectly applied makeup began to smear. This is absurd, she whispered, but her hands were shaking too much to close the book. It's all documented in triplicate, I said conversationally, perched on the edge of her vanity. Those offshore accounts, not as untraceable as you thought. Electronic fund transfers leave such convenient timestamps. The doorbell rang. Her guests were arriving. You're going to go downstairs, I said, my voice dropping to a gentle, lethal whisper. You're going to host your party. And tomorrow at 9 a.m., you and Dad will meet me at Judge Henderson's office to discuss the terms of your continued freedom. This is blackmail, she hissed. No, I corrected. This is justice, with a touch of mercy if you earn it. The party was a masterpiece of dramatic irony. I played my part to perfection, toasting her wisdom and guidance, watching her flinch at every double-edged compliment. She held herself together with the rigid control of a marionette, her smile a brittle, fixed grimace. When my father returned, I gave him his copy. His reaction was quieter, more contained, the lawyer assessing the damage. The shock, the fear, were all there, but buried beneath a layer of cold calculation. Where did you get this? He finally asked, his voice hoarse. Mom. The single word hung in the air between us, an unassailable truth. That evening, on the sterile patio that had once been my mother's garden, I laid out my terms. Resignations, the return of the stolen funds, their continued, supervised roles as consultants. In exchange, no prison. You're 16, Cassandra spat, desperate. You can't run a company. I have a team that has been waiting for this day, I replied, and I've been training for it half my life. My father, defeated, signed everything the next morning in Judge Henderson's office. The power of attorney, the transfer of voting rights, the resignation. He signed the final document, barring him from contacting me directly, using my mother's own Mont-Blanc pen. As he stood to leave, a broken man, he paused. Your mother would be proud, he said. It was impossible to tell if it was an apology or an accusation. I know, I said. Part 5, the legacy. 2 months later, I sat at the head of the conference table, in what had been my father's office. The transition was announced as a family succession plan. I was the youngest female CEO in the industry, a headline that masked the brutal truth. My father remained a figurehead, his life a gilded cage of my design. Cassandra, who had tried to flee to Miami, was caught by the FBI and returned, broken and compliant. The divorce my father initiated, using the infidelity clause I'd uncovered, left her with nothing but a monitored existence. It wasn't the justice my mother deserved. Nothing could be. But it was control. It was legacy. It was accountability. Last week, I visited my mother's grave. The headstone was simple, just her name and dates. "I did what you asked," I whispered, placing a bouquet of wildflowers, the kind that used to grow in her garden, against the cool granite. "It's safe now." As I turned to leave, I saw her, Cassandra, standing at a distance, clutching a small, expensive bouquet of her own. Our eyes met across the quiet, manicured lawn. There was no hatred left in her gaze, only a hollowed-out recognition of the monster she had helped create in me. She nodded once, a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture, before turning and walking away. Some lessons take years to teach. Some gifts keep giving long after they're opened. And every Mother's Day since, I sent Cassandra the same thing, a single, framed photograph of my mother, laughing in her sun-drenched vegetable garden. Tucked into the frame is a small card that reads, simply, "Thinking of you today." She never responds. She doesn't need to. The message is received. It's the only language we have left.